talk is, I don't know how many of you guys actually read the summary on the wiki or if you just saw the little one-liner in the program. But this talk is basically about what we've learned from doing the Google Summer of Code. Anybody not familiar with the Google Summer of Code? No? Awesome. So we've been doing really well in Summer of Code. This is our 7th year doing it. The typical recruitment success rate for Summer of Code students is about 20% if you look across all the organizations. We're at about 65% right now. And
how do you define success?
What do you mean?
Passing the project, or
the number of students who pass who we successfully convert to developers, ongoing developers after the summer is over. So there's really two parts to successfully recruiting people. One is to get them to start in the first place, and the second is getting them to actually stick around, versus sort of a one-patch flyby. And so I'm going to talk mostly about how you get them to stick around after they've, had their first involvement with your community. And then we can do a little bit of demo type stuff later on about how do you get them to contribute for the first time. And that's, in essence, if I had to sum it up in one word, it's about making the barrier to entry very low, right? Have the lowest possible activation energy, make it super easy for people to contribute, how they do it, where they do it, even why they do it. People go to their website, they use your software. Well, why should they work on it too? Isn't using it enough?
Feature request.
Yeah.
Do you want a feature? Okay, go off and develop that.
Exactly. Yeah. I'd be happy to take your patch. I look forward to it. And then that raises the whole question of, well, you have to make it very easy for them to contribute the patch, right?
What's a patch?
You have to, if you look at the Linux kernel, they have like this huge document that says, like, here's exactly how you format a patch, how many spaces to use in front of text, where to send it, and all that kind of thing. So most of the stuff today, though, is basically what do you do to get from 20% of people joining to 70% of people joining. It's basically a 4-step process. The first step is admitting you have a problem. So step 0 is the easiest one, and this is basically use metrics, right? You don't know if you're improving if you're not tracking stuff, if you're just operating on feeling. So you have to decide, well, first of all, like Jeremy said, what does success mean to you? In the context of the Summer of Code, it could mean projects that succeed. So do you get the code at the end of the summer? Or it could mean, do you get the developer at the end of the summer? Or it could be both. So you have to decide which one of those matters to you. And you, a lot of times, do have to set a priority on it. Sometimes you do have to pick one or the other. In Gentoo, you saw on the last slide, we have about 15 students every year for the past few years. And I honestly am not sure how much of their code we've ever incorporated into the distribution itself. And that's because we honestly don't care. We think that the value comes after the summer's over. The summer is for them to essentially learn, like, here's how you can contribute to our project. Here are the kinds of things we do. Here are the mores in our community. Here are the standards we operate by. And then we figure that the value is going to be after the summer's over. 3 months of a newbie developer versus 3 years of somebody who actually knows how things work, who understands, who's more productive. The value is pretty clear.
And a question.
Yeah.
So, do you think that is the goal of most of the students that apply? Are they trying to get projects? Are they trying to get paycheck? Are they trying to become a member?
And that's a great question. So the decision on goals has to pervade all the way through your program, whatever you're doing. And I'm talking about Summer of Code here, but it can apply to any context, more or less formalized. So for the Summer of Code example, the students have to write a project proposal. It then gets ranked, and we pick the top N. And so in our project proposals, the way we rank them and the way we rate them is based on factors we care about. Factors like, do we think this student will stick around? Or we do the best we can to get at their motivation, to understand why they're doing it. There's other organizations out there who all they care about is a successful product at the end of the day. They don't care if And so for those organizations, somebody who's only contributing the code and who walks away at the end of the summer is a better fit. Somebody who's looking for that $5,000, you know, I got you flip bits, not burgers, and then back to school in the fall. But for our project, we want people to stick around. We don't care about the code, and so we're looking for people who have different motivations. We'll ask them flat out, but we'll also try and read that from the way they talk about other things. One of the most compelling questions we've come up with is, how do you envision the long-term maintenance of your code? Right? And if they don't say they're going to be working on it, that means they're not planning on being there. But you have to do it carefully in a way that doesn't give away what the right answer is. So, you know, it took me a while to think of how do you phrase that question in such a way that the answer is not obvious. So, yeah, very simply, I mean, decide what you're trying to do, and then start tracking progress toward it, figure out what kinds of things matter. So, for example, I, of course, don't think you can read that, but here's a spreadsheet, and this is what I use to track every student's project, what they're working on. And it's, you know, very simple so that I can see at a glance exactly how things are going. The summer of code is like a 12 or 13 week program, and what I do is every week I make students write a progress report. It's a little bit of bureaucracy for them, but my time is not nearly as large as theirs. They're working 40 hours a week, and I have 5 hours a week maybe to spread across all of their projects and try and figure out what's going on. So they submit a progress report. I frankly hardly even care what's in it. That's for the mentors. I'm you know, managing the whole thing. I just care that it's there and that it looks kind of reasonable, like they've been working on something. Because that lets me, you know, at a glance see that, okay, they're working on something. The mentor's job is to say, is this reasonable? And they reply to the progress report and say, what, you've been doing this for a week? Like, this is 30 minutes of work. Why are you banging your head against the wall? But for me, I just want basically a dashboard, because I'm almost like a stupid business manager at this point. I don't want to understand what's going on in the internals. I just want the quick view. So all those black things are like, did a student submit a progress report that week? And you can see that it's mostly black, and there's almost none of them that have 2 weeks in a row that don't have one. So they might have disappeared for a week, but then they got back on track the next week. And in fact, I'd have all kinds of fancy conditional highlighting that says, like, you know, if they're behind by 1 or 2 reports, suddenly the whole thing flashes red.
You set up that they're actually filling out a Google form, Google Doc, or?
The way I envision this working in the future is that the mentors fill out a Google survey thing, and then it gets auto submitted into this. Haven't done it. Yeah, it's just manual. I mean, it's one of those things where it's not worth automating it until you spend less time doing the automation than it takes to do it manually. And for this, it's like, well, I'm reading these emails anyways, I'll just put a black box on a spreadsheet while I'm at it. So it doesn't really matter how you do it as far as recruitment, but it's important to think about, you know, recruiting developers almost like trying to get prospective customers to sign on, right? You kind of want a CRM type environment where you can track how they're doing, how involved they are, how often they're communicating with you guys, and everything like that. So here's kind of a zoom in view, and you can see, let's see, I can't point to both of these at the same time, unfortunately. But all the black blocks are the weeks, and the red stuff is basically like, do they have experience with my project coming into it, or do they not have experience? Turns out that people who get involved early on are much more likely to stick around versus people who, this is a brand new thing to them. And let's see, I think I have another one here. And this is the other half of it zoomed in. And this is the part where I'm actually tracking not just sort of a breakdown of are they communicating, but progress toward the goals, right? How do I recruit the developer? And it turns out that it's very simple. I just have the mentors ask them if they want to become developers. And then I put yes or no into a box. And I keep having the mentors ask over and over, like, do you want to become a developer? It'd be really cool. because it's important that the person trying to sell them on this is somebody who they actually know. I could ask them if they want to become a developer, but it doesn't have the same kind of impact as coming from the mentor they've been working with for many weeks. And then on the far right, I've got the metrics, and you see that the recruitment of total students is something like 93%, and of students who were new to our project, it's more like 89%, because there's one or two people who are already around. So, the final point of this step is think about recruits just like customers. You have to sell them on it. You should track the progress toward getting them recruited. If this is something you really care about getting better at. And the second is very simple, and it's just a matter of setting the expectations. I don't know exactly what this is, but I wanted it to be the 10 Commandments, so that's why I put the picture up there. And it's, in essence, just saying, we write down on our webpage, and we say, most of the people who contribute to our project eventually become long-term developers. You just set the standard right up front, and then they internalize that. So every time they contribute a patch, they're thinking, oh, so maybe I should think about becoming a developer here, because they said a lot of people who contribute to our project do stick around. It's weird that it works, but it does. I mean, just having one sentence on the top of the website that says, for the Summer of Code program, it says, most of our students become developers eventually. And that was, part one. The second, here's an example of that. I actually took a screenshot. So at the top of our list of project ideas, there's one sentence in this paragraph that says, in the past, most of our successful students have become Gentoo developers. So your chances of becoming one are very good if you accept them. And that sentence alone has greatly increased the number of people who stick around. So it's about, you start measuring progress toward your goals. You start trying to use a little bit of psyops to convince people. And finally, you make sure that they build social interactions with your community. It's not, people don't stick around because of the technical aspects. They stick around because of the social ties they build with people. And so it's very important that when somebody's contributing, you make sure they are interacting with your community as much as possible. And not just with one person as a conduit, but broadly with a mailing list, with IRC channels, with forums, however your whole community talks about the project, that's where you have to make sure these people contributing are. And that means that it's actually, in a way, a bad idea to have a bug tracking system. It turns out people are more likely to stick around if you make them post patches to a mailing list where they're openly discussed. And so you could think about the bug tracking system as sort of a backing store for a mailing list, right? So you can track progress, but at the same time you want the stuff to be openly, being discussed in the community and not off on, bug 15387 that 2 people are CC'd on. And let's see, here's an example. So again, in the Summer of Code context, it doesn't necessarily apply, but we require everybody who's applying to actually participate in our development community. It's the second bullet point. You have to post to the mailing list or we don't even consider you. If you don't talk...
Post before they join your project, you mean? Or?
Before they apply.
While they're applying, and I'll get into generalizing this more a little bit later. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll show you the ideas page because that's about barriers to entry. It's about giving people a way to contribute that's obvious when they say, oh, I'd kind of like to work on this. What do I do? You have to show them something to do, otherwise they'll leave. Here we're forcing people to participate. The other way to force them to participate is to have a document that says, if you want to contribute to our project, here's the way you do it. You post it on our mailing list, versus filing a bug as your first interaction with the community. And that's for a variety of reasons, not only because, unfortunately, a lot of people do react in a hostile fashion to bugs being filed, but they react much better to problems being reported on a mailing list. I'm not sure why that is, but it does seem to be the case. And then this is the third column of the spreadsheet I showed, or the last picture anyway. Just ask them to stick around, right? So at first you build this perception that most people do stick around, and then here's the money shot, right? You say, please stay here. We really appreciate your contributions. You've been great, and we think you could be a really valuable person. To go back to the motivations idea, a big motivation for a lot of open source developers is appreciation and credit for what they've done. And not only that, but for the ones who do this because they're basically trying to build their resume, it looks good to be a long-term developer on an open source project versus I can't even think of a person who would put on their resume that they contributed a patch. They filed one bug against Rails. And you put that on a resume? No, but if you're a developer for Rails, well then it's a whole different story. Then something that actually becomes very interesting to a lot of software companies who are hiring. So, yeah. And in our case, I say, okay, are they interested in becoming a developer? Yes, no. It goes back to metrics and tracking how they're doing. So to sum it up, and I'm going to go into the demo after this, so I'm not quite done talking, but I do hope you will push back at me a little bit and tell me whether you believe any of this, or ask me how to generalize it. But so it's basically start tracking stuff, use a CRM, use a spreadsheet, whatever makes you comfortable. It doesn't really matter. Try and convince them that they are expected to stick around because it works. Make sure they're interacting with your community to increase the likelihood that they will stick around, building those social ties. And finally, maintain the connection. So don't let them leave without continuing to talk to them over and over. And so it's not just about asking them to stick around, it's about, if they contribute a patch, don't wait 6 months to ask them. You should keep that communication going all the way through. So in the Summer of Code, for example, we try and do this as much as we can. The idea is don't let them disappear for 6 months before you ask if they want to become a developer. As soon as the summer's over, you should say, we want you on board. And well, even better than that, what I'd like to do is, before the summer's over, say, let's get you commit rights right now. And that builds in them the sense of commitment. People hate to violate their prior commitments. And so if they're a committer, they probably won't leave. This gets a lot easier in the days of Git and GitHub and so on, because it's very easy to have multiple repositories, or with things like Garrett, you can actually do access control on a branch basis. So you could say, you get this branch in our main repository, and you can push there whenever you want. And that gives people the commitment and also a sense of empowerment that they're a real open source developer. So that's really the key points. Let's see, I wanted to show you the ideas page. Let me see if I actually have the internet working here. There we go. So if you go to Summer of Code, ideas page, this is what you see. There's a little bit of an intro that tries to convince people that they're expected to stick around if they work on an idea to contribute anything at all. Then there's a section that says, you're expected to participate in our community, build those social ties. And then we get into, well, what are you actually doing? What are you coding? And every idea has a brief description to get people a little bit interested. And then, importantly, it has who do you contact to learn more? Who's your mentor going to be in this? People don't really like just shooting off a mail to a black hole or even to a mailing list. But they like having a certain contact who they can rely on to respond. And from our point of view, it's very useful to have one who's an experienced mentor versus just emailing some random person in the project, which a lot of times is how things work out now. They just find a name on a website and say oh, hey, John, I'd like to contribute to your project. What do I do?
Can I?
Yeah.
With Gentoo, it's pretty visible, right? relatively speaking. Do you have any ideas about how you would go about promoting something that is a little more obscure? You know, you've got something, it's out there in the wild, but you know, people are using it, bug reports are coming in, but you know, nobody knows about it, and
Right.
you know, you need some help and you want it to take off. How do you attract people
Right.
to contribute to your project?
I think there is, you know, maybe 3 different components to it.
I mean, there's you get the bug, what I alluded to earlier, you got a bug report, well, hey, why don't you fix it? And do a pull request, but
Right.
that's one way.
Yeah, so I mean, there's maybe 3 aspects or so. The first one is doing very transparent development and being a very transparent community, so that everything you do is just out there on the website for anybody to see. And this, you know, kind of builds a web presence for you, and then when people are just out on Google searching for something, they might find your webpage. They might find, you know, some bug track talking about some feature that isn't even in your software, but it would be cool if it was. And they'll say, oh, well, it doesn't quite do what I want yet, but it's the closest thing out there, and if I add this one feature, then it would be perfect. And then another thing that, I don't know, is maybe obvious and maybe not, is you need to be out there in the community, right? If you've got a CRM software, you should be out there on whatever forum sites are talking about CRM software, you know, promoting what you do, but not doing it from sort of a annoying marketing perspective, doing it by being technically awesome. Like when people have a question, you answer it, and you build a reputation of, oh, your developers are, you know, really experts on this, and every time there's a question on this website, it's one of your people answering it. You know, good examples of that might be like Stack Overflow or Hacker News. You know, when people are talking about technologies that you use, or about, you know, competing software or your arena, be there talking about it. That's probably the best way to build awareness. Certainly among developers. If your audience is not developers, it's a little more complicated, because a lot of generic end users of software aren't out there talking about it in forums. Who are yours, just out of curiosity?
Like people that have to do with like quantitative analysts and finance data developers, people that use the fixed message protocol.
Okay. Yeah, it's
so it's a pretty small technical community.
But it is about being out there in the community, wherever the community exists. You know, and
My
you don't have to be
problem
buying
is
booths at
a lot
conferences.
of people that use this stuff is proprietary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're using stuff that I do, but they're not advertising that they do it because the stuff that they're doing in-house is all super secret.
They
Right.
can't talk about it.
Yeah. So they're being bogarts with.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, be at the quant finance conferences where everybody goes and nobody actually talks about what they do because they can't. At least they don't during the talks, but that's why you go out for beers afterwards.
Get them drunk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I hope so.
So you said that the mailing list is so much better than bug tracking. So does that mean that one should think twice about using a bug tracking tool and just rely on the mailing list instead?
I wouldn't. A lot of projects have tried that, and what happens is that stuff gets lost. Stuff falls through the cracks all the time. That's one of the reasons we started tracking students in a spreadsheet, is we were getting big enough that students were falling through the cracks. And there's only 15 of them. How many bugs are getting filed? You know? So the best practices that I've seen are that when somebody files a bug, it auto shoots an email off to a list. And then you can discuss the bug and the patch there publicly. So you've got the tracking aspect, but you also have the community aspect. It gets tough once the project gets to a certain size, but it works very well for small to medium-sized projects. And I will say also that Gentoo isn't actually doing a lot of this stuff yet. in the broader project. I'm working on bringing some of the lessons from the Summer of Code to the rest of Gentoo even. And so you guys may well beat me to it if you start doing it first. Turns out that a project with like 200 developers moves pretty slow. A lot of momentum there. Steven?
Sure. If you look at the developers that were originally students and become developers, how would you compare their productivity, whether it's quality or number of patches, to some of the other developers?
I would say it's really good. We're already pre-filtering the students who apply and who get accepted to be consistent with, our philosophy and our community. So it ends up that people are a lot of times on the same page there. Yeah, definitely. And then the ones who don't stick around, well, we don't know.
So I'm curious how you had a high proportion of your students were actually involved in the project. There wasn't any students. I was wondering if that was just by accident or by interest, or did you do anything to sort of help that out?
That is kind of an accident of how the program is designed. There's enough prestige behind the Summer of Code at this point that there's students out there doing research before the program is even announced for the year, saying like which projects have been around for a few years and have a bunch of slots. And then they go and get involved in those communities a couple of months ahead of time, which is great for them because they're much more likely to get in. It's also great for us because they're building those social ties that we're looking for.
So I guess the problem that both the projects I help mentor with is there are a lot of slots and there's a lot of interest, but it's more from academic folks, their scientific project. And so we'll get, in the last week we must have got, 100 new line, brand new to buy Java, emails to the mailing list. And I mean it's great to have interest like that, and it's good to get some of those students in, but we don't see them stay on afterwards because it's almost as if the professor said you guys should all apply
Yeah.
this week.
That's the kind of students that wouldn't even get accepted by Gentoo. Because we are really big on encouraging people to get involved as soon as possible. And that's why, we're basically shouting it from the rooftops. Like, as soon as they look at our ideas page and they're considering applying, we say you have to be involved in the community.
How do you vet them? I mean, like, is there any vetting process? If I'm going to hire somebody, right? I ask them to go up to the whiteboard and write some code, solve a problem, or whatever. Do you have anything like that? I mean, what if they suck?
There's a very, very small population of people who can write a good technical proposal without being able to implement it. Because to have one that is sufficiently detailed for us, you have to be talking about, a week by week timeline of what you're going to be working on. And if you can do that, you usually have a good understanding of how to implement it because you've already got a plan for how to do it, and the mentor has agreed that plan makes sense.
So I'm looking at your wiki page. So they're looking at their list of wiki ideas, and then they write a plan based on one of the ideas that inspires them, or they come up with another idea. Is that
Either, yep.
And obviously, you thought about the ideas that you shared here. What ideas actually, what kinds of ideas typically result in the most, inspired contributions by the summer coders?
The most inspired contribution?
Inspired, where they actually follow through, or they really just excel, versus sort of get bored and realize, why did I do this?
I don't think it's as much about the kinds of ideas as finding a fit between the idea and the student. And that's, again, kind of self-selecting because they're applying to the ideas they care about. So it's just important to have a diversity of potential projects out there so that you can target all the different kinds of people who would apply or who would want to work with your project. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to what types of projects this works well for? Like when you're trying to accomplish something, what types of things are good to accomplish specifically?
For us, we mostly use it for things that are not on the critical path. In other words, stuff that doesn't have to happen, or that if it happens slowly or the student fails, it's not going to hold up everything. It's for, sort of nice to haves. Like an example is, I think we've had a project for about 3 years at this point. Everybody keeps re-implementing about tracking package statistics. So what packages people have installed on their Gentoo system. It would be cool if we had that data, but we don't need it. It's fine if it doesn't happen. And so that's the kind of idea that you should come up with, is stuff that can sit on your website for like 6 months and still need to be done, but not need to be done so badly that you're actually going to do it.
Probably a lot of the ideas, would you say that the contact person can easily do it, but they don't have time, or?
Yeah, and I would say, the vast majority of projects like this, how it works out is that the time the mentor spends mentoring is equivalent to the time the mentor could have spent implementing it. And so that's a wash, and the point is then to get the new developers to stick around so that, the net benefit increases.
Can you talk a little bit about mentors? Who are they? How do you recruit them? What's the mentors?
For us, let's see, our mentors are all current developers. Well, they're not all current developers, in fact. Most of them are current developers with our project who have commit rights. For me, they have to not be pricks, or I won't let them in, because it's very important that a mentor be socially good, otherwise the student will get a bad impression of the whole organization. So it's about both technical and social skills. And you have to have both of those for your, I'd say you're a bad developer, but you're a horrible mentor. Nobody's going to stick around if they get abused all day long. Yeah, Jason.
Do you require all applicants to have actually installed Gentoo?
We don't require it. In fact, on that spreadsheet I didn't focus on it, but there is a column that says, does this person have experience with Gentoo? And with Gentoo, that means you have to have actually installed it and run it. We do accept students who haven't done that. We don't accept them for projects where they have to have a real deep understanding of how Gentoo works. But there are a lot of peripheral kinds of projects. We've had a lot of web apps. We had somebody write a web app for recruitment so that we could, track the process and everything. We had somebody write a web app that was like tracking meeting agendas, that kind of thing. And so those people, it honestly doesn't matter whether they run Gentoo at all. The problem is getting those people to stay with your organization afterwards, because they have no connection to what you exist to do. So they do have the social ties, but then they don't have the same technical ties. They could go do it anywhere. They could write, a web app that does X, Y, and Z for Drupal or for Gentoo or for, whatever. I want to go back though and talk more about the mentoring thing. So how do you find good mentors? Well, first of all, it's usually people who have projects they want implemented. I don't come up with all these ideas myself. I get all our developers to contribute ideas. 99% of the time, they're the best mentors to the ideas that they suggest. The other 1% is when they've got social issues, and then I usually try and find some other mentors who are also working in that area. But that's really not been a major issue, not a point we're focusing on. So three aspects of this. One is an interesting idea. Second is actual people with names and contact info there who they can get in touch with, who will be good mentors for them. And then finally, what do you need to do this idea? What kind of prerequisites are there? It's not going to work out very well if you have, an idea that's written in like deep C and assembly, and you have some Python person who wants to do it. It's not going to go very far, very fast. So, having a simple list of ideas that's interesting and easy to start getting involved makes a big difference. Whether it's a formal mentoring program or just a list that sits up on your website that's trying to, lower the barrier to entry so you get more people involved.
I would say in general, it's good to have lists like these that are up all the time.
And
not just
yeah.
like a goal.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly the point I'm making. The thing we don't have on here that we should, and that you absolutely should have if it's not part of like the summer code type thing, is the difficulty level, and the sort of length of time that you expect it to take. Because you don't want somebody jumping in on like a 3-month full-time project when they have 2 hours a week to work on it. So you want to separate them out by both kind of how lead you have to be, and then how much spare time you have to have. The two are usually highly anti-correlated. Yeah, so, I mean, do you have any more questions? Or I'll just sum it up if you don't. Yeah? Cool. So, yeah, lower the barriers to entry, start tracking what you're doing, and spend a lot of time talking to people about why they should contribute to your projects and why they should stick around from the very start. That's about it. Works for us. Try it out.
Great.
Thanks.
Fix that typo, by the way.
Thank you. So should Alright, which one is fixed?
An additional tab. There was no L in additional.
Ah, excellent. Like a validation of the whole open source philosophy right there. Many eyes travel boats. Let's see.
Is there any benefit to the mentoring organization for the summer code project? I'm not familiar with.
Google gives organizations $500 per student.
In theory, a bunch of work gets done.
It's
In theory.
pennies for the amount of time and effort that
Yeah, I
goes
mean,
into
it's
it.
immediately obvious why you want them to stick around, because in the short term, they walk away, it costs you.
Well, in the short term, our aim is to break even most of the time if we can.
Yeah.
But that's on the code being completed. As for the code being integrated, that's a different story. And that's something that we're kind of failing on right now, honestly. So no point in talking about it as a useful point for you guys.
I think for the project I'm involved in, we're more interested in, references in the academic literature. So even if a particular summer code project is not all that successful from a code point of view, the fact that we got the student to interact with the software, they're going to go on and do a postdoc somewhere. Chances are good that they're going to continue to use the software, what they're doing there, and then we may get a reference back. To our papers. So
Yeah.
sort of the benefit we get.
That's applicable outside of academia too. I mean, the idea is that you get people familiar with your software, and then the next time they have a project that could use it, they're probably going to take that. They're not going to go pick your competitor, unless your summer totally
And then you
sucks.
sell them support contracts.
Yeah, there you go. Cool. So yeah, if you want to talk more about this stuff, let me know. If it sucks or